Hi, everyone. Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm delighted to have three very knowledgeable speakers with us today on the panel with extensive expertise in driving innovation and navigating disruptive technologies and harnessing AI within their organizations. Rather than just go through their bios, I'm just going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and just kind of share what drew them into the field of AI and how they embarked on their journey in this space. I'll start with you, Peter.
Morning, everybody. My name is Peter. I'm the CEO of Northell. We've recently been acquired by HH Global, which just makes us part of a larger company, which is great. We focus specifically on marketing operations, activations. That's really where we are at the moment. My background is technology, engineer by trade, ex-Microsoft, Sapient, Cognizant. I think what drew me to it is just the power of being able to apply this to real business problems and the impact you can have. And I think a large part of what drew me to it is the ability to be creative and reframe the problems, which is a large part of what we do at Northell.
Thanks, Peter. So my journey to AI was probably a little different. I didn't start off in data science, so I'm more of a classically trained marketer. Came through CPG packaged goods a number of years ago, but quickly started moving into data analytics, data management, understanding insight. But having that consumer grounding, understanding what's important to the consumer, had drawn me into large analytical firms, consulting with large retailers, airline, hotels, who were really trying to solve the same thing through data. And my pull into AI became what was once science fiction. I can remember everyone talking about Customer 360 20 years ago, and how do you solve it, and how are you going to put data together? AI became that enabler, that real link that actually brought a lot together faster. So my journey into advanced analytics and then into application of AI was more from the real world, which was how do I help clients, how do I help retailers actually get to real world results?
Thanks, Derek. I'm Nikolay. I'm director of machine learning at AI at AstraZeneca. So last 8 years, I've been applying AI to help scientists to develop new drugs which are safe and efficacious. And actually, what drove me to focus on AI actually is from childhood. I was very keen on building robots. And in the past, I was building robots for vacuum cleaning at Samsung Electronics. But I think like the last 8 years, I'm really focusing on applying AI for helping patients. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm Dennis. I'll be moderating today. I'm a senior transformation and change leader within the pharmaceutical industry. Similar to the panelists, my interest is obviously how it can help solve real-world problems, but I'm also passionate about the ethical and responsible use of AI, especially coming from pharmaceuticals. So today, we're going to continue exploring the conversation around hype versus reality. Can generative AI deliver the value and productivity gains we've been promised, and if not, what needs to change? Yesterday's session highlighted some key themes, the need for a robust data strategy, yet we seem to be running out of data, the limitations and unmet expectations of a still maturing technology, the regulatory challenges and societal implications, this discussion around the need for growth first, to focus on growth rather than efficiency, or at least an efficiency after that, and that AI is not a strategy, it's a tool. So before we kind of go into the discussion today, I'm going to ask Peter, if he doesn't mind giving us a 10-minute kind of recap of some of the things that you probably heard yesterday. So just going to kind of cover those things at a very high level, and that's going to kind of set the context for our discussion today, because we're going to try and get a little bit more deeper into how do we really apply those to real-world applications. So Peter, I'll hand over to you, if that's okay.
So I'll take 10 minutes just to reframe, and the idea is to set a baseline and sort of move beyond that a little bit. I think I had a good conversation with Matt last night as well around, well, data strategy is great, and we know we should have it, but how do you actually do it? That's more the practical application. So I'm going to recap and sort of use these external sources to kind of just say, look, we know this exists, and we know the impacts, and here's a few baselines, and then try and move beyond that and actually invite you to engage with us if we haven't gone deep enough, ask really practical questions, and give us feedback as well, because that's the other part of the panel. So is it mega trend or is it hype? I think some of it is mega trend for sure. I think this is not going away. The rate of improvement is definitely significant. I can see changes myself, and we use these tools on a daily basis, both for what we do and how we engage with clients. So The biggest thing for me is that it's the cognitive sort of side of things. It's no longer just mechanical, replacing simple steps. It's really displacing different jobs that we never saw coming. So if you look at the future of work paper on there, basically highlights that the impact is unexpected. If you are highly qualified, these things impact you. Traditionally, it doesn't do that. It sort of replaces the lower end of the spectrum. I think there's also the power dynamics, which the Harvard Business Review article referred to. So how does this impact power dynamics? So who has the power with this technology? What can they do with it? How can they influence society? Where does the wealth and power accumulate? So really interesting read if you can get a chance, have a look at that. Sort of really informed view as well. And then where we really care about is on the right-hand side, which is what's the value chain and where does the value accumulate? And then how do we help clients and ourselves make smart bets? So make the bets where the value is going to accumulate rather than try and compete with areas where it's saturated or potentially we can't be competitive in that space. And then the one in the middle is the Gartner hype cycle. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. Gen AI is right at the top still. And the point is not to say Gen AI is hyped. It's basically to point out that there are other technologies around it that actually makes up the complement of tools you need to see this through. So the broader point is around composite systems, understanding how that works. And in reality, it's not about LLMs. That's one very small slither of what it actually does. It's not about generating text. Sometimes it's about representing text, just to give an example of how we apply these in different areas. So again, not to read all the headlines, but just to point out specifically where we operate and specifically what we see. And I know some of the names are represented here as well, but there is definitely an arms race, both in MarTech and in marketing services. You can just read the headlines. They date back to roughly January. I stopped capturing them because there's so many of them. But they're all sort of pointing at investments being made, or at least bets being made in that direction in different areas. So again, impactful. One of my observations is there is definitely a say-do gap. So what people say and what they actually do, there is a gap there. And so our ambition is to plug that gap. So our sort of horizon at looking at this is roughly 12 months. What can we do in the next 12 months to make a difference? So we don't talk about Gen AI specifically around its future in 5, 10, 15 years, although we keep those trends in mind, but it's actually how can we apply it practically today to make a real difference for the businesses we work with and our own business. There's some things that people don't want to always acknowledge. There are some common themes with previous tech changes, I think most notably digital transformation. The lessons from that still apply. You still have to pick your battles in terms of having a portfolio and making smart bets, because every company has scarce resources. The challenge is how do you allocate them effectively to make a difference? So you still have to run this as a portfolio of initiatives and pick the ones you think is going to return the most value and allocate resources smartly in that. And that comes down to focus. Focus is the thing that makes a difference. Because if you spread your funds thinly or your resources thinly, those things tend to not work out and they co-invent and reinvent quite often. To make this work, the next two are really key, and I don't have to educate anybody on this who's done any change transformation piece or have been involved in it. The technology has to integrate with the process, so it has to fundamentally change the process, so people have to adopt it, and it has to integrate with your current technology. And a lot of the demos and videos completely ignore initial conditions. They assume that you have perfect initial conditions to start the program, and you don't. So you have legacy, you have processes, you have a running business that has to make the next quarter. These are all realities we have to deal with. So not considering that actually underestimates the investment you actually have to make, and a lot of initiatives actually die because they haven't scoped them correctly from the outset. The bottom left, key one is talent. And when I say talent, I don't mean really good engineers. I mean rounded talent across the complement of skills you need. And a lot of it is actually to do with social skills, interaction, being able to communicate effectively, being able to translate high-level concepts to more tangible deliverables. So it's the whole range of skills you need to make this work. The reality is, if you're in the space, you're competing with Amazon, you're competing with Google, you're competing with Microsoft. So the challenge is, how do you create an environment that you can attract talent? So a key consideration is to how you set that up for yourself. And then managing the risks. I think there are risks associated with any technology change. I think some of the things with Gen AI specifically are disproportionate. So you end up with reputational damage, those kind of risks, which are not traditionally considered part of technology change, but they have disproportionate impact. So consider those as well. So this slide is a summary of Jan LeCun. So I thought I'd get the master out to tell us what he thinks about this stuff, just to make sure that it's not me saying this or just our observations. But what he's basically saying is, and he's comparing this, it's a really good talk on YouTube, and what's quite telling about the viewers on YouTube is that Jan LeCun gets about 100,000 views, but doomsday scenarios get millions. So it just shows you what's grabbing the attention. So what LeCun is basically doing here is comparing the current technologies with children and animals and saying that's the benchmark we're at the moment. So he talks about brittleness and specialization, which is a reality we deal with. So when we put these things together and actually try and change business processes, there is a lot of engineering still going into it, a lot of bringing things together, trial and error, making them work, complement each other, and then finding out which complements or combinations work. That's a reality today. Despite popular belief, these things are not great at reasoning and planning. They appear to be, but they're not actually. They're not quite at the level where they can replace decently designed decision systems, decision support systems. So the old sort of symbolic systems are still far better at what this can do. It does similar things, but not the same and not to the same level. We'll talk a lot about data inefficiency, and we'll get some insights around how we deal with some of those challenges at a deeper level. We all know about the models, the LLMs, they're autoregressive in nature, and they do get things wrong, they get factual errors, and so people tend to they believe it more than they should, basically. They're not well informed as to where the data comes from and how it works. So part of the challenge is how do you ground it in fact and how do you check? So that's a large proportion of what we do as well. It doesn't have common sense, despite popular belief. It appears to have, because it writes better grammar than I can, but it doesn't actually have common sense. Humans are still far better at that. And also at framing problems. It doesn't do a good job of framing problems. We tend to frame the problems. AlphaFold is a good example. Someone framed that problem, and then we applied technology to do the heavy lifting. AI didn't actually solve the problem in its own, independent of humans, so that's very much still the case. And then supervised learning is still the staple. And supervised learning, as you well know, need labels, and that data isn't easy to come by, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these are the common challenges we still see, and we still grapple with these. And a lot of what we do is actually focusing on those, because unless you can solve those, the technology in and of itself doesn't have value or doesn't realize the potential within the businesses we work with. So just to leave, I'll leave on the slide, but the frame we have, I want to create for the rest of this discussion is that of competitive advantage. If we're all honest, and the reason we look at new technologies is to gain competitive advantage, because that gives you the permission to grow, which gives you the permission to do new things. And the way we look at this is very much a value engineering frame set. So the mindset is we want to come up with solutions that actually address customer needs, and that's Derek's point. So this has to be grounded in some sort of reality. So in some cases, you work in a large organization, your customers are actually users within the organization, but they are still customers. They still have to adopt the technology. You still have to solve a real problem for them. And AI, for the most part, is a displacement problem. You have to displace an existing system with a better solution. And unless the solution is better, they won't adopt it, which effectively means you've wasted time and money. And then the final point is just to say it has to be a viable offering, new in your context. Doesn't have to be new to the world, so you don't always have to use the latest technologies, which we see a lot of. People want to use the latest, shiniest technology. It doesn't have to be that, but it has to create value for both the producer and the consumer. So if you create value for a client, they also have to extract value from it, and that's a really important point to look at this. So it's not about new necessarily, it's about the old fundamentals of are you creating value and are you extracting value. So with that, I'll hand back to Dennis to see us through.
Thank you, Peter. You've given me a lot of stuff to write to kind of talk with the rest of you. So looking at the current state of generative AI in business and the value chain that you refer to, many organizations obviously expected big gains, but AI hasn't delivered as hoped. So continuing that conversation, I want to ask the question, why is that? And what are the key challenges holding companies back? So I'm going to direct a question to you, Derek, if I may. From your expectations in the company that you're with, what were the expectations that your sector had for AI and competitive advantage that we kind of want to strive for? And what has the reality been?
Fair question. So hype versus reality. You start off, everyone's had it. So I mentioned earlier, what we're doing now would have seemed like science fiction 15, 20 years ago, sometimes even 5. So what we're seeing for hype is people thinking this one solution will do everything. And you see a lot of people looking at ChatGPT, which is an amazing interface, personal productivity off the charts, learning how to do websites and do other things, but then they take it into the enterprise and start trying to do things. And the challenge then becomes, you can't transform the enterprise with ChatGPT. You can't transform the enterprise with some of these tools. It transforms the individual from a productivity standpoint. The other piece you have is, comes back to some of the basic principles. Who's your customer? How's this coming together? What is the actual solution and what are the outcome? If you're not engineering all those pieces in, AI then starts to fail because you're usually having to take out a process and change it. It's usually not saying I have a process, I just want to make it faster. Well, if you're making it faster, you're probably taking out 15 steps. If you're taking out 15 steps, you're re-engineering it. So the hype versus reality is people thinking this is easy, I'll do it in 30 days, or we'll get it done in 90 days, when it takes 12 months. Or I can get this done. So the biggest gap that I see is in people realizing how long it will take. The second gap we see is in talent. You will see people who think the PMO has to run this. And I like PMOs, we work at the office all the time. But the problem generally is it's a different skill set that comes with AI. It's a different constituents you have to work on the democracy of the data. And using the old analytic approach doesn't always solve it. So the biggest thing we see is it's the wrong players at the table. The last thing I'll say around talent is usually it has to be at the C level or at the very senior level that this happens. When it gets done at the mid-level, you don't get the change that happens. It's not just a new tool, right? It's usually a new process. It's usually a different way you're going to market. That's a fundamental shift. The companies that we work with to get that right are looking at it as not as, here's my AI solution. They're changing, how does this go to market? Or how do we do this different in the organization for better effectiveness? Or how is this doing productivity? It's changing a lot of their key things. So that focus on there is where we see kind of the biggest piece. One other piece we'll talk about is the data dimension. We said a lot yesterday, it's been saying everything data is kind of king. It's the new gold, it's the new oil. It's true, but I've yet to meet someone with perfect data. Maybe Google and Amazon and a few others, Apple's aside. Enterprises have lots of data. It's never been perfect. They've spent lots of money getting it much better. But you don't have, it's not a disability. There's synthetic data. There's a bunch of other things that can be done. You don't have to have the enterprise do everything at once. Usually we find it's what's that use case in that one department? Or what's the specific piece where you apply AI that's going to give you great value on a very narrow use case? Then it happens fast, value is realized, and you move to the next, versus trying to boil the ocean and give the enterprise completely up. That hype for reality is a lot of people think they can do that quicker. It's still very fundamentally prioritize what's going to work, make sure it's consumable, and get to the ROI quickly.
Thanks, Eric. So what I hear you say, kind of three things: having realistic timelines, the need for right talent, especially at the C-suite level, and obviously getting grips with the data. And we'll probably delve more into data in the next topic. But can I ask you the same question, Nikolay? What expectations did your sector have in the pharmaceutical space, and what has the reality been?
Yeah, so quite often senior leaders at AstraZeneca come to me or people like me who are AI experts and asking us how we can use Gen AI to automate, accelerate, or innovate. And then, yeah, so it's kind of from top to bottom, right? But also we have many talented people with background in AI who come up with ideas how it can be used. And of course, yeah, it's kind of iterative process, managing expectation from both sides. And yeah, and at the end of the day, like, yeah, we have a few, I would say, use cases where we already see that it's reality. And just kind of to highlight briefly, so one is like, as was pointed, data is also always a scarce resource, especially in pharmaceutical companies, and generating synthetic data that can be used for downstream AI applications. To train models to support drug development, to support doctors. So we already trained a few models and we see a lot of impact there. Then also automation, right? Many processes are quite manual and Gen AI, for example, can produce, like let's say, automate some parts of pathologist work. So for example, we work on generating pathology reports directly from images. So you take an image, scan biopsy, for example, and then you run Gen AI model, visual language model, and produce a report. And that report, of course, not perfect, and it will never be perfect, but it saves time for pathologists rather than writing this report from scratch. They can quality control the report, edit it, it saves time. And the third one, as Peter mentioned, like annotations, right? Traditionally, if you want to build a good AI model, you need a lot of data, a lot of annotations, and these annotations, very often, it's not just cat and dogs, right? It's something like, for pharmaceutical companies, very specific domain knowledge. Back to pathologists, right? For example, we need annotations. Where is cancer? What kind of cancer? And people like me, even like I've been working 8 years in healthcare, I cannot distinguish cancer cells from normal cells. We need very specific pathology knowledge, which are very scarce resource. I mean, pathologists are very busy and also very expensive for them to spend time on annotating. And what we can do, we can use some transformer-based architectures to learn some imaging features back to, like, for example, biopsies or some scanned tissue specimen. And then AI can learn some useful features and even highlight areas where cancer is. So we can use Gen AI to even get some initial versions of annotations.
Okay, thanks, Nikolay. So we talked a lot about data yesterday and the role of data in AI effectiveness, and I've heard all three of you talk a lot about data just now. So data, as we know, is the backbone of any successful AI system, but poor quality data often stands in the way of AI delivering real value. So how do businesses, I mean, like I said, we heard a lot about data and the need for it and everything else, but how do businesses really get started? What do you do to kind of get them to prepare their data and get more from AI? I'm going to ask you, Peter, if that's okay first.
Thanks. I'll sort of build a little bit on what Derek said. I think it's picking a use case and just getting enough data in a decent shape to get started. That's priority, because actually in getting ready for the use case, you learn more around what you actually need. What I see often, and have been seeing it for years, is that large initiatives around perfect data, data lakes, enterprise landing zones, name them all, they happen, but they happen horizontal, disconnected from an outcome. And because there is no focal point in an outcome, everything becomes optimized, which actually is over-optimizing in some cases. And what you find is you do more work than you really have to deliver value. So our approach to it is pick a really impactful use case, understand your stakeholder group you're creating value for, and then work back from that and understand what data you need to just drive that single use case. What we also see a lot of is the people we actually work with to change processes don't necessarily have the level of access to the data that they require. So they don't actually have API data access. They don't have access to the big data lakes. So oftentimes they give us Excel spreadsheets because that's what they get access to through MI tools. And then we tend to link those up with other sources that we might get access to. So data linking and understanding how to link disparate sets is a really key skill to get going into delivering your first AI use cases. What you can then do from that is going through maybe the manual steps of preparing Excel sheets. We build tooling for that quite a bit, linking them up with data sets. You get actually reasonably decent data sets to get your initiatives going. You can then use that to build momentum to say, look what we've done without your help in terms of getting real data, and use that to turn the funding cycle and go and ask for more money and basically expand that initiative to be broader, but because you can show tangible results. What we often see, the failure is not the initiatives to get data right, but it's the tangible results as a result of that. So a lot of money goes into engineering data lakes and building all these capabilities, MDM capabilities that are really broad. But when you say what's the actual results, it's very hard to put your finger on it. Things are better, but no one can explain how. Whereas with a use case driven approach, it's super simple because you can say, we took this process that took weeks, it now takes hours, and we use this data set. And you can really create a nice narrative to go around and get stakeholder buy-in and build momentum around your initiatives. That's a really practical thing we see all the time. Some of the other challenges we see is around annotations and labels, but more fundamentally, there's a lot of knowledge embedded in organizations that float around between systems. So things like PDF documents, really powerful PowerPoints, these kind of things. And the challenge is the knowledge is there. There's evidence that there's knowledge is there. It's just not machine readable. it's not reusable artifacts. So a lot of what we do is actually convert or help and assist convert those with AI. So can we speed up the labeling process? Can we speed up the extraction process to create that ready data set for machine readable use cases? So even those are really powerful use cases, and some people can't do that at scale, but you just have to do enough of them to get momentum to then drive the initiative forward. It's all about building momentum and effectively creating a stakeholder group that buys into your solution to help you sponsor and see it through. And through the cycles of learning, you can actually identify what are all the other complement skills you need to build, where you need to change processes, but you do it in small enough iterations to continually prove value. And so the idea of horizontal engineering perfect data is not something we advocate for. We advocate for sufficient data to drive the first iteration of a use case to then prove the value and stop if it doesn't work. Like if we have good enough data and we can't prove the efficiencies in the process hypothesis or the effectiveness of what we do, you should stop, in which case you haven't wasted that money. You can allocate that scarce resource somewhere else. That's how we approach. And I think that's what we see work, and we get momentum and buy-in from that.
Thank you. So, not to put you both on the spot, but is there additional things you can share around how companies really get started with data?
Sure, and there's a lot of different approaches, whether they're small, medium, large enterprises, what their investments is. But a lot of the data things we've seen are very similar to what Peter is talking about, which is you start with a relatively sizable use case, but controllable. So where are the different data sets? A lot of people get caught up with the fact that it's not all in a perfect format. And so that's where we look at where AI comes in. So you can use knowledge graphs and ontologies that take things that are disparate and put them together. So Peter mentioned a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. Then you have sales data, you have stuff coming in ERP, you have stuff coming in Salesforce. You can pick your platform. It's in all different formats. You have PowerPoint decks that the CEOs use to approve this piece, and you follow it all the way down to say, what was the initial strategy to what is the actual sales forecast to what is actually going on in manufacturing, what's going across the business. That can all now be put together. And that's really been the bigger game changer I've seen when people start in data. You don't have to make these massive investments in these large data engineering projects in order to put that together. The ontologies of what's available and where it has and those connections are what's starting to change the game. So now you're getting people who very quickly can put these data points together. The data points are the insight that actually make AI work well. Right? It doesn't need a massive amount of synthetic data to do it. You can do this with real world by putting the stuff together. So that's where we see the biggest benefit people are getting now and today when they're being very targeted on what they want to do. Anything like that?
Well, I'm only going to ask you if you, well, I mean, I don't know if you've got much more to share, but unless you want to talk about synthetic data, I know you started the conversation just prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add to Derek, how we also deal with, we never have enough data, but we start with what we have, and usually our approach is, we build a proof of concept model, and we set some performance metrics, sensitivity, specificity, and then we try to understand if it's good enough for some specific use case to save time for doctors or to identify, to support their decisions. And then we throw more data and see how performance changes. So then we have this dynamic curve, and then we kind of try to extrapolate and see how much data we need. So this is kind of a very pragmatic way how you can deal with it. I've seen many data science teams that saying, our model doesn't work because we don't have data, right? It's an excuse for many kind of projects sometimes saying, it's not because that problem is not solvable, you just don't have enough data. So to synthetic data. So we never have enough data, so how we deal? Of course, in-house, we generate a lot of data from clinical trials, preclinical, but we also team up with some external companies, CROs, clinical research organizations, who have a lot of data from, and then we have a way how to share the data, which is also a challenge on its own. Then there's a real-world evidence data in hospitals, so we also work that data, and it's imagine how many people potentially, how huge demographics for these kind of data sets. So we work with it. And also we explore, back to generative AI, synthetic data. So the idea is to build models, foundational models, for example, that were trained on large data sets. Of course, you need some kind of specific data sets relevant to healthcare use cases, human tissues, or like animal tissue, because a lot of stuff is happening also in preclinical space. And then you have a generative model that can generate data with specific properties, specific demographics, specific, like let's say you can generate cancer or no cancer. And then that data, why would you need this? You can throw that data in your training set and build models that perform even better. And actually we just, still very early, I would say, in research. So there's like still kind of, I think, to unlock the potential. But what I've seen so far, like we have models that can generate, let's say, CT scans. And then you show the CT scans to radiologists and they cannot distinguish real and fake or synthetic, let's call it synthetic. And same with pathologists as well. We generate like some, let's say histopathology images and show to pathologists with like 30 years of experience. And they cannot distinguish real and synthetic. But of course, we need this data to be useful for downstream tasks, to automate pathology, let's say, for example, workflow. But what I'm trying to kind of say that images we generate using this Gen AI already kind of as good as real ones. If you look at them, how they're useful, we are still exploring.
Okay, thank you, Nikolay. So shifting away from data, and Peter, in your presentation, you talked about the kind of importance of technology integration and process integration. So I kind of want to get deeper into this technology space, right? And leveraging advanced AI tools for real productivity gains. So I'd like to explore with all of you some of the advanced tools that can help AI perform better. I know yesterday, I believe Sir Nigel talked about things like retrieval augmented generation and knowledge graphs and how they can make AI more effective. And so in your opinion, how are these tools solving real problems? So first of all, I don't really know much about these tools, so is anyone willing to explain advanced tools like knowledge graphs and RAG, as I understand the abbreviation to be, in a way that the audience will understand for those who don't understand it?
I'm not going to give any sort of definitions of what it is. I'm telling you what it's supposed to do. So it's basically grounding. So you effectively want to ground what is these auto-generative models, for the most part, into some sort of evidence base that we've decided and agree upon represents the domain. And there's a number of ways of doing it. The tools we use specifically are ontologies, property graphs extensively, because we can model semantic meaning of different relationships across the business. And typically where we see that as useful is if you have a process with multiple systems representing steps in the process, the question is, how do you connect those systems up to come up with meaningful insights? And the answer is that the relationships between the entities in the systems are actually what you're after. And that's basically what knowledge graphs does, property graphs in our case specifically. And that helps us then do the advanced stuff, not to the level that was explained yesterday, but Professor Bronson did a great job of talking about geometric deep learning, which is how you get additional insights. So we kind of want to get into that space by representing knowledge in a particular way. It's all around grounding in pre-existing knowledge. So when, for example, we work with a business who maybe don't have enough data, what we would do is ground it in ontology, and then use that as a way to extract knowledge and map it onto the properties we want out of unstructured text. So that's one of the techniques we use. So it gets around the idea of having perfect data. We use the technology to get to perfect data to then get another iteration on the technology. Broadly speaking, that's what it's meant to do. That's the intent. And when we talk about RAGs, it's retrieval augmented generation. So rather than just generate out of the training set that the model was built on, we give it additional information, but it's context specific. So it's domain specific. It's potentially proprietary. And so you can reference it. So there's a number of benefits, but the idea is the models itself doesn't have knowledge. It is exceptional at representing certain elements and exceptional at generating fluent language and particularly style transfer, those kind of things, summarizing. But actually the knowledge that we give it is grounded external. And the grounding techniques we use are effectively ontologies, knowledge graphs, and document indexes. Those are the kind of things that feed into it, not exclusively those. But what we do specifically is we are able then to connect rich media assets. For example, a video, we can explode a video into a number of components, which are the faces, the scenes, the descriptors, all that kind of sub-elements of a video, connected up in a knowledge graph, and then we can ask more intelligent questions about the video. So we can describe videos really accurately by actually decomposing it into the regional parts that made up the video through knowledge graphs. So that's the purpose, it's grounding. If you want to summarize all that, it's grounding it in real knowledge that exists in the business, but it's not codified for machines to use. So these technologies are effectively representations of implicit knowledge within the business, so domain-specific knowledge, proprietary knowledge, typically.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. I'm going to move on to kind of maybe talk a little bit more about the integrating process piece as well. And I hear a lot about the promise of compound AI systems. I'm sure there's probably numerous ways of explaining that. And what I understand is compound AI systems offer a powerful way to automate complex business processes by combining multiple AI tools. Businesses can use these systems to both boost efficiency and decision making. So I'm going to open up to anyone who wants to talk about it. But are there examples that the panelists can share around the use of compound AI systems and how they work together to solve complex problems?
Sure. So compound AI, it's just the integration of a bunch of different AI tools to get you a different or better outcome. It's where we started hype versus reality. You could use ChatGPT, it's one tool, right? There's a bunch of things that generally have together. So real world examples, we work with a large global company right now who does, of all things, customer need satisfaction, but they're on a scale of millions of customers. But they're also talking to the CEO of the top 700 companies globally every quarter. And they're videotaping that and asking him questions. What's going in your business? What are your biggest challenges? What's working against you? How well are we performing? And you're asking at the C-suite, at the director level, at the VP level, at the procurement level, all the way through to see how they're doing. That's one great piece. So computer vision is then used to decompose all that down to say, who is this individual? What are they saying? What's the commonality? What's really behind that's happening at each customer? It's easy to do if you're talking about customer A. It becomes more challenging when you're looking at 700 to 1,000 different customers at scale and have different problems. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. Then we're using knowledge graphs and ontology to bring what's the sales data? What is the profitability data? What is the distribution data coming in? What was the contract supposed to be and how are they actually delivering versus it? And you put that with the verbatims and now you get something very powerful because now you're understanding when someone gives you a high score or a low score, why? It also allows you to start opportunity spotting trends. So predictive modeling comes in. What could be done differently? Where should time be spent? Where should more resources be spent? So you're also now taking what is a very simple process, wrapping it in robust data that gives the perspective that a CEO is looking for, a decision maker needs. So when they make an investment, next person, next product, they know exactly why they're doing it. And so now you can do that at scale where anyone in that organization who is empowered to do it is democratized. They can see it in seconds. What used to take them a team of 20 working nonstop, we do in hours. And it just changes the conversation. It also empowers different people to do different things. So if you're a CEO and you want to know, who do I need to call this week or this month? Who do I focus on? It's instantaneous. It's no longer sorting through and having to talk to 20 people. Same thing in account managers, who you're focusing on and why. Those questions are already answered. Now it's the quality of the conversation. What is the problem you got to solve? So that'd be one way, a real-world example how we've seen it and use it. But there's lots of others. So that's customer pieces. We have, if you looked at large retailer, same pieces. They've got lots of data and lots of moving parts, but it's not connected. And so the ontology or the knowledge graph brings it together. The computer vision can then look at all their global assets. So you have a large multinational company that probably has 1.5 million digital assets they create every year, right? It's what's going on, everything from TikTok to their website to their social page to what they're doing in Uganda for which is happening in Canada versus what's happening in France, and the customization or specialization they have to do because of rules and regs. That's just a massive amount of time and effort that's been generating these items that largely can be replicated, largely can take codified processes like what's the regulation if you're talking about something like AstraZeneca? What are the regulations that are in place in France? What are the things that are different versus Canada, right? So FDA will tell you what you have to do in North America and the United States. It's different but different regions. That used to be complex. This would take a battalion of lawyers, a battalion of marketers who are risk averse and afraid of the lawsuits of getting it wrong. Now that can be codified and preempted, so that it takes far fewer people to do it with higher confidence just because you're pulling it together. And then with computer vision decomposing all that, you can also go to the next step and say, which ad works better and why? What's the talent? What's the voice? What's the context? And that then applies not only regionally, but globally. So there's just a lot of advantages that happen when you're taking multiple tools and putting them together under combined AI, because one solution generally doesn't fit. It gives you one piece of the puzzle. You're actually looking for an actionable strategy. And most of the enterprise has this data. It's just in different places and in different formats that before you could never put together.
Okay, I'm just going to move us on, just conscious of time. So I'm going to ask just one more question before I open up to the audience. So roadmap for success and what needs to change. We talked about what needs to change for AI to truly deliver value, from things like getting the best out of your data. We talked about advanced AI tools, integrating AI tools into your business processes to gain those real productivity gains. So from leadership to data infrastructure, what are the key steps businesses should take to ensure AI success? And I'm going to ask you each to share with the audience, from your perspective, what is the single most important thing businesses should do differently to get real value out of AI?
For me, it's focus. I think focus on actual implications or business impact for your initiatives, not the technology. I think that technology will emerge and will get far better over time, but if you're not actually solving a genuine business problem with impact, you're not going to get the next iteration of that evolution going. It's all about getting the first step right, or right enough to then make progress. And the other piece I would say is, generally, when we frame this as competitive advantage, it will be about how fast you can get to market, how quickly you can learn, and how cost-effective you can do that. And if you work back from that, then understand what it takes at the engineering level, the process level, and the business level to get those things right. But it's fundamentally about taking small steps, learning faster than anybody else, applying the learning, and starting the flywheel, turning the flywheel. If you can get those right, that's generally where competitive advantage comes from. Because what you'll soon realize is once you've done it and you've arrived, you realize you haven't arrived at all, you have to take the next step. So getting ready for that assumption that it's always going to be false summits, one after the other, and gearing yourselves up for learning and learning faster than anybody else is actually what sets you apart. Because the technology will evolve, the landscape will change, and the way we apply these to different domains will change over time. And being prepared for the fact that things will change and you have to learn is probably the best tool that you can apply.
Thank you. The same to you, Nikolay, and then you, Derek.
Yeah, I think what is important to keep in mind when you're trying to solve some problem, to start with something simple. And by simple, we are talking about AI. So do you really need Gen AI? Start with something like maybe rule-based system and set a baseline. And then you can do it very quickly, usually. And then if you're not happy with the solution, go to Gen AI. And I think I've seen quite many projects where it's okay, we just need to use Gen AI as a solution and without and skipping the step of finding its baseline. So I think that's important just to approach a problem from very pragmatic use case. But at the same time, I spent a lot of time working on computer vision use cases, and deep learning there is state of the art. So some simple solution won't work. So what I'm saying, Gen AI has a lot of potential, but I think it's important to have some baseline, which is very simple and something you can easily and quickly set up, and then it will help you also to demonstrate the efficiency gains from Gen AI. You can say, okay, this is baseline, 60% accuracy. With Gen AI, you can get 85, for example. So I think it's also a strong selling point why you need Gen AI.
So I agree with what the panelists have said. They've covered a lot of ground about being pragmatic. For me, it comes down to it's making smart bets. So which are those departments or which of the organization where you can have that use case you can get the most of. But it's also making sure who are the people internally who are running it. It's not uncommon you'll see analytics teams dispersed across an organization. But you almost need, if not a centralized, you need a small group of people who have the tools, have access to the resources, who put together and solve this problem for this one business unit. Take the learning, and then that group is then deployed to the next business unit who's trying a different problem but has that domain knowledge and learning. It's that small group of people who are learning, taking that learning and then applying in the next iterative process versus, well, they had success over here. Team B now wants to try the same thing or something different. Team C, you just lose out on that knowledge transfer when they do that. Organizations wants to do it because it's great sharing and learning, but you're better to build that excellence first and then have them move into the other teams. It seems simple and pragmatic. I've seen it done the other way. You just lose cycles and you continue to make the same mistakes versus what AI allows you to do, or the promise is to start to leapfrog and start figuring out what's the stuff you can go faster on and where you should be pressing it. It's a great thing about, when you talk about hyper versus reality, the people that get their hands dirty and start working with us generally have the insight that lets them go faster the next time. And the last piece, I think is Peter's point, it also gives them credibility because you're disrupting process, you're disrupting ways people work. They want to work with someone who's actually done it in the past and had some success and can prove back. And so doing that helps on the change process because there's hype versus reality and there's the fear. There's a lot of fear internally about what this is going to do. When they see it's being worked before by some practitioners, it's a little bit easier to get it done quicker.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor to our audience. If you have a specific question to the topics we discussed or you want to share a thought, and then ask a question, please do. I'm going to ask this lady first and then come to you, just because I saw a hand go up first.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for a great talk. My name's Beth, and I have a fintech consultancy in London. I'm from traditional finance, Bloomberg 20 years all over the world. If you do fintech ones, I'm good because that's where the fun is. That's where the fun is. Sorry about that. So we've heard a lot of talk about how to get acceptance of artificial intelligence in an organization from the C-suite perspective, but then also how do you get buy-in as you trickle down. And all the gentlemen today brought up really good points. Nikolay, start, slow. Start with something really basic and build. Peter spoke a lot about how to sort of build something into a business process. But one thing I haven't heard mentioned, this has worked for me in the last 2 jobs that I did, sort of had, VC-backed smaller places in London, fintech space. And one of them was, so I'm building verticals on top of, say, a reconciliation engine. But I figured when I got there, so verticals, I need to know what the customers do. Nobody knew. I interviewed everyone in sales, everyone in marketing, blah, blah, blah. They could not give me a good picture of what their customers did. But you gotta love your devs, right? They're your best friends. So I started sort of exploring the data. Long story short, knowledge graphs from the metadata of the customer, their data inputs. And they said things like EMIR Bloomberg. So we knew they were using the Bloomberg trading system, and we knew they were doing some kind of reconciliation for EMIR regulation user. So, but senior management not having it. Hackathons. Hackathons are your best friend. Engineers love it. You bring together everyone. So I had someone from sales, had someone from marketing, and had someone from engineering and in AI engineering as well, and someone from data. All came together, and me, I brought the business side of it. So what's the payout? What's the potential ROI of doing this? And we won the hackathon. And that's what started the AI journey in that firm, and then it wound up. The second project we did was comparing divergence between EMIR, MiFID, et cetera, in a post-Brexit world. So then we're starting to get into using ChatGPT, et cetera. But if anyone's in that space and everyone's not coming from some big behemoth of a company, that is a great way, in my experience, to introduce AI and to build teamwork. And it brings people at a lower level together. They feel pride in winning a hackathon. And it also provides something for the C-suite as well. They actually knew who their customers were. So just a really practical, base level example, but it's worked. No question, because you guys were great.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Well, thank you very much for the panel. I'm an academic from Oxford here. I work on ethical AI innovations. As you know, Oxford is really strong on this. And recently we set up an ethical design grant challenge with practitioners as well as the college in Oxford. It's very successful, lots of buy-ins from innovators. It's really good to hear everyone here talking about prioritizing users' needs and values. But as an academic, I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts about where do you see ethical AI innovation sit into the whole integration? You know, we are not going to be the first to call for solutions to improve your efficiency probably, but they are really important. Where do you think we could demonstrate value? Is this something for specific sectors, do you think, rather than something to be think more broadly by the industry?
Can you hear me now? Brilliant. Sorry, I'm surprised you can hear me. I think the challenge with framing everything as efficiency is actually short-sighted. So I think that's very much limiting yourself in terms of creativity, and you need to think more broadly about this. And so the framework, I think, from how we think about it is that of value creation. So most of these things have value potential, as we all know, and this is why there's massive investments going in, and we think it's great. Then there is the cost of realizing value, which you have to subtract from that if you do a simple equation, because it takes money and time to get this right. But I think there's also value erosion. And so if you disproportionately affect your stakeholders or you do things that are unethical, they will actually vote potentially with their wallet, hopefully with their wallets against you. So you have to consider that in your decision making from the outset. So I think more holistic approach of dealing with it is what I would advocate for. I don't know that I would single it out as a specialism. I think that's where we rely on people like you to help us and say, like, can you work with us? What's the right frameworks? That's the more pragmatic approach. I think just building on the previous point around getting customer data and feedback, I think there is no real substitute for leaving the building and talking to real people, because the data doesn't tell the full story. It's whatever you manage to capture. It's a representation of the activity or the perceptions or the views. And so I think there's no shorthand for actually leaving the building, talking to real people, which would give you that lens to understand, are you eroding value? Are they potentially disproportionately affected by what you do? Are there potential risks? It doesn't take away the fact to be informed and have a specialism in that, but I think that would be my approach to it. And when I've seen most impactful changes we have and the insights we actually came to in the end and redesigning, rethinking things was actually talking to real people. And they would give us insights that isn't in the data, but it helps you look at the data differently. And so considering that fact would be, that's how I would approach it. And there's no shorthand for that, I don't think.
Okay, so I think
This lady is Letitia Bertrand. Hi. I'm currently studying AI for business at the University of Oxford Site Business School. Thank you, first of all, Northell, for sponsoring this session. So what I do right now in the current segment of my career trajectory is raise AI awareness in underdeveloped areas. After working in corporate America for over 30 years, I'm now concentrating on Africa, starting first with Nigeria. So my experience has been talking to people who are very intelligent, high-ranking. Last one was faculty of law at a major university. However, the level of knowledge for AI has opportunities, let me put it that way. So, but I think that they are in the right spot for adopting AI. They've got the right infrastructure, they've got the buildings, they've got the staff, they've got the internet, they've got the good roads within their universities. And there are more universities that are approaching me now. My question is, if you were to take me on as a as a client, hopefully in the future, what would be your top 5 points to advise me to get my people ready, so it's not just hype, telling them about AI? What do they need to get ready? And I'm talking about from high-end government officials to the low-end market women selling pepper in the market. I'm talking to a broad range of people about artificial intelligence, not just becoming aware about it, but incorporating them into their systems, the work, and building robust AI ecosystems. What would be your top 5? Maybe round robin. You first, Peter. 1 each. Okay, 3. Thank you. Thank you for a great panel discussion, by the way.
So my answers will be more conceptual by just the way I'm wired, I think. But I think the opportunity is discontinuities. So you don't have to do what everybody else has been doing, and you can actually look at that problem completely differently. So that's the one, this is the frame, is that of discontinuities. And the study I put up around the future of work actually identifies that people who are earlier career stage, underdeveloped countries probably have a better opportunity to gain value from it, so basically improve their own skills, capabilities. So effectively what I'm saying is grassroots would be a good way to start. I don't think teaching and preaching about AI is practical. I think showing what it can actually do and how it can be applied is a more practical approach, because people don't really care whether it's AI or not, it's whether it's useful to them and whether they can make a difference. So those would be my 2 key takeaways, I think.
Thanks, Peter. Building on that, I'll go the higher level. So if you're talking about government and infrastructure, it would be, everyone here's got an iPhone or a Samsung. How do you actually take those devices and to deliver the services easier for the population? Because you don't have to have the legacy infrastructure. You can actually make what's digital, what's easier, and using the AI to see whether it's medical infrastructure, whether it's base banking, whether it's base infrastructure, it's the quickest way to get value. And to Peter's point, it's just a user experience for them. You're just shortening it down so they have more power to engage at all levels.
I think for me it's more kind of imagination, right? Because I work for AstraZeneca, so. But I guess like what is important, I like this hackathon idea, right? So I think getting engaged and trying to solve a problem, yeah, I think that's would be something like, kind of to produce some value quickly. So I'm just kind of imagining, of course, like, yeah, if, getting kind of jump on some real world problems and trying to solve it and articulate the value of that AI-enabled solution, I think that would be like a good start. And I think, yeah, as I don't see like there's like much kind of prerequisites for this, because there are so many different platforms these days, like Kaggle, or so much public data, so many. I mean, you really need to have access to internet, and then you can start, training some models and producing some value and articulating how these models can be used. So I think, for example, AstraZeneca, we engage like, yeah, kind of companies, startups, but also individuals and, university students, so on, because it's a huge pool of talented, ambitious people who can contribute to building something and helping patients, delivering new drugs, or even kind of highlighting, yeah, kind of innovative ideas. So I think, yeah, there are definitely a lot of opportunities. I mean, we can catch up. I can, yeah, tell you more about this. Yeah, thank you.